At this moment, Jiu Haitang became the focus of everyone's attention. She was so excited that her face flushed. She puffed out her chest and shouted, "If there is half a phrase of lie in the following words I, Jiu Haitang, will say, then let me be pierced by 10,000 of the demon's poisoned arrows and die a horrible death." She pointed straight at Shen Qingqiu, flames of fury raging in her eyes. "This person right now is Changjiu Mountain Peak Lord Shen Qingqiu, the famous and reputed Qiuya sword. But no one knows what kind of thing he used to be." Her words were rather offensive. Qi Jingqi's elegant brows furrowed. "Oi, what's your words?" Jiu Haitang right now was a hall master of some miscellaneous small sect. Reprimanded by one of the leaders of the large and influential Changjiu Mountain sect, she subconsciously retreated a step. But the old palace master said, "Peak Lady Qi, there is no need to be angry. Why not let this young lady finish speaking? You can't block a person's mouth after all." Jiu Haitang looked at him and gritted her teeth. The hatred in her eyes concealed the fear. Her voice rose again. "When he was 12, he was nothing more than a slave my family bought from a foreign human trafficker. Because he was the 9th, Jiu, he was also called Little Jiu. My parents, seeing he was mistreated by the slave dealer, really pitied him. They took him home, taught him to recognize words and study, gave him the means for food and clothing until he was warm and without any concerns. My brothers looked after him like part of the family. When he was 15, my parents passed away and my elder brother became chief of the household. He removed the slave title from him and considered him a foster brother. As for me, because I grew up with him, I was deceived by him, going so far as to truly think we complemented each other. We were each other's sunshine, and as a result, set up an engagement." Shen Qingqiu was standing right there, forced to listen to his own black history apparently, along with several thousand other people. The countless unspoken words in his heart were completely changed into tearful silence. Tears surfaced in her eyes. "When my elder brother was 19, a wandering cultivator came into town and settled here because of its nurturing spiritual energy. At the town gate, he set up a platform where young girls and boys under the age of 18 could come and test their spiritual prowess. He wanted to choose an outstanding talent to become his disciple. That cultivator had a body full of immortal techniques. Not a single townsperson didn't exclaim with admiration and praise. Shenjiu, of course, also went to the spirit testing platform. His aptitude was so good, so he was picked by that cultivator. Overjoyed, he ran home, wanted to leave my household. My older brother naturally didn't agree. In his eyes, cultivating immortality was an affair full of uncertainty. Besides, he was already engaged with me. How could he suddenly abandon his home and leave? He got into a big argument with my brother. At that time, he was morose and cheerless. We thought it was just a temporary mood. We waited for him to understand and naturally accept matters." Her expression suddenly changed. "Who would have known that very night his true beastly nature would be revealed? He went berserk, killed my brother and many other household servants. The corpses littered to the ground of our home. Under the cover of night, he left the town with that cultivator. With this huge change in my family, I was only a weak little girl who was powerless to support the household. Such a big family and all the property destroyed. I painfully searched for this person, object of my grudge, for so many years, always without finding any trace of him. The cultivator who took him under his wing back then had long died a violent death. From then on, the trail was even more broken. If not for today's chance coming into Jinglan City, I'm afraid that for my entire lifetime, I would not have been able to know that this villain, who bit the hand that fed him and backstabbed his benefactors, was somehow climbing up in the world this entire time, and even climbed up to the position of a peak lord of the biggest sect under heaven, even though he's very different from the past. But this face, even if it was turned into ash, I will never mistake it. I'm not afraid to name that cultivator who incited him to commit such a violent crime either. He was registered in the wanted list for many years, the one whose hands took innumerable lives, Yuānzuì." This Yuānzuì could be said to be notorious with countless criminal records. Suddenly, the news that one of the 12 peak lords was one of his disciples, the crowd couldn't help but be terrified. But amongst the wide expanse of gasps, Shen Qinqiu instead calmed down. His heart was actually faintly doubtful. At first glance, the experience Qiu Haitang relayed was full of eventful ups and downs, but it was not without its holes. It wasn't that Shen Qinqiu discriminated against the original Shen Qinqiu, but the original work had devoted lots of energy to Shen Qinqiu's unpleasant personality, his impulsiveness, his rigidity, narrow-mindedness and pettiness, impoliteness and lack of communication, inability to know how to win favors, aloofness and vanity. This kind of personality made it hard to believe that the young Shen Qinqiu would be so lovable that a person with no blood relationship would see him as kin. But when others interpreted these words, they could not catch these details. Originally, Shen Qinqiu was most afraid of this part of the plot, but he was not extremely fearful. This kind of old event with bygone years didn't have any definitive evidence. If the accusation relied solely on Qiu Haitang, he could convince Qiu Haitang that she recognized the wrong person, as long as he bit fast and refused to confess. So, in the end, it would just be a questionable, faint stain on Shen Qinqiu's character vitae. There was no choice. Shen Qinqiu truly did feel sorry for Qiu Haitang, but that was the original Shen Qinqiu. He really didn't want to carry the blame. He much preferred to make it up to Qiu Haitang using other means. He didn't kill Liu Qingge, didn't act any sort of way with Ning Yingying. No matter what, this shouldn't go as far as to make this, quote, sturdy as 1,000-foot-tall building, unquote, reputation collapse in a single night, muddling his way until everyone yelled to beat him up. But right now, it really was different. The situation was bad because all these questionable, insignificant stains had amassed together. First, the Sower's control, then the old palace master following close behind, and now Qiu Haitang's accusations could actually become the proof for his improper character. A scum man abusing a woman and then throwing her away, a traitor colluding with the demons, a disciple of a wanted criminal. It was like adding extra flowers to an already perfectly configured brocade. They were all beautiful coincidences, each agreeing with the other. As a result, people wouldn't find them to be mere coincidences anymore. The old palace master said, "Sect Master Yue, when taking care of these affairs, being swayed by personal convictions is unacceptable. Otherwise, if word gets out that this grand magnificent Changqiu mountain sect covered up a person whose record is so full of notorious stains, how can this be an outcome that'll satisfy everyone?" Yue Qingyuan's tone was indifferent. "So, the palace master means—" "In my opinion, it would be best to have Shen Qinqiu relocated to Huanghua Palace for the time being. Wait until we've asserted the truth before we come to a decision. How about it?" Everyone knew the true meaning of, quote, relocated. Beneath one of Huanghua Palace's temporary imperial residences lay an underground water prison. With complex terrain coupled with Huanghua Palace's labyrinth formation, this, quote, shoving to the bottom of the trunk, unquote, kind of method was not on the same level as those protective arrays only used to stop non-cultivators. The interior of the water prison was densely guarded. The equipment of the torture chambers were comprehensive, specialized without compare. All those imprisoned inside were the cultivation world's most heinous and reprehensible cultivators, their hands having been stained with blood, or having violated prohibitions. To put it briefly, Huanghua Palace's water prison was the cultivation world's public prison. Apart from this, if a place was needed to temporarily keep custody of cultivators suspected of endangering the human world while they were investigated, those cultivators would also be sent to this place. After the four sects held a joint trial, the punishment would then be carried out. Liu Qingge sneered. Said enough. After he had controlled his temper to listen to this nonsense for so long, his heart had long harbored fire. He turned his hand and grabbed the Chenluan sword behind his back, poised for a fight. Opposite him, Huanghua Palace's disciples each drew their swords and leveled them in front, glares meeting. Yue Qingyuan said, "Brother Liu, stand down." Though Liu Jingge was not pleased or willing, if he had to listen to one person, he could only accept Yue Qingyuan's words and so, reluctantly, let go of the sword handle. Seeing him withdraw, Yue Qingyuan nodded. This sort of accusation cannot be supported by mere words. The long sword at his waist, its hilt as black as ink, suddenly sprang up from the scabbard to reveal an inch of blinding white blade. In an instant, it was as if a giant formless net was cast above the entire grounds. Within the net, spiritual energy undulated like the tide, rolling and rushing without pause. The cry of the sword seemed to drone in the ear without respite. Quite a few relatively younger disciples inadvertently covered their ears, their hearts wildly pounding non-stop. Yuānzuì sword! The people of various sects on the ground were bowled over because of this. Yue Qingyuan told Liu Jingge to stand down because he was going to enter the conflict himself. Has the world turned upside down? It was said that since Yue Qingyuan took up the position of Changqiu Mountain's highest peak lord, he had only drawn his sword twice. One time was the ceremony of receiving his office. The other time was in the battle with the descendant of the heavenly demon's lineage, Luo Binghe's father. Though Yuānzuì sword only emerged an inch from the scabbard, everyone suddenly understood. To be able to sit on Qiongdinghuo's highest place definitely needed more than just a mild and an unflustered temperament. The old palace master said, "Lay formations!" Was this the rhythm of war? The demonic clan hadn't even fought their way here yet when the humans began fighting first. Shen Qingqiu saw the situation was wrong. He hurriedly went to grab his sword and threw it out in front. Shouya's sword flew straight and stuck into the ground in front of Huanghua Palace's palace master. To throw away a sword was the same as surrender, indicating he'd comply with his sentence. The old palace master immediately retrieved the sword. He waved his hands to make his sect's people return to their places. Yue Qingyuan said quietly, "Junior brother." Shen Qingqiu said, "Yue brother, you don't need to say any more. The truth will speak for itself. Qingqiu is willing to be restrained." This old palace master was like an old and confused person, biting fast and not letting go. Combining forces with the additional Sower and Qiu Haitang, being imprisoned was an inevitability, the final nail to the coffin. In any case, the original work also had this happen. He thought that he had managed to avoid it, but didn't anticipate he would still wind up traveling the fixed route of the original plot. There was no need to harm Changqiu Mountain and Huanghua Palace to make two sects fall out. Shen Qingqiu insisted, "Discussing any more is pointless. I offer myself up willingly." After saying this, he didn't look to see Yue Qingyuan's expression, but instead swept Luo Binghe a quick glance. Neither happiness nor anger could be seen on his face. He stood steadily in his original place, a clear-cut contrast to the surrounding cultivators who had their ears covered while their heads spun. After a long pause, Yue Qingyuan finally resheathed his sword. It was as if an invisible net was removed from the air. Shen Qingqiu turned towards Yue Qingyuan and gave a deep bow. With all said and done, he had given this martial brother a lot of trouble. It really was embarrassing. Qiu Haitang was still sobbing. When Qin Wanyue walked past her, she consoled her. "Young Lady Qiu, whatever the situation turns out to be, the three sects will give you a proper retribution." She said three sects, pointedly leaving out Changqiu Mountain to make her position clear. Qiu Haitang's expression was moved, eyes brimming with tears, and raised her head to thank her. Upon catching sight of Luo Binghe standing to one side, both of her cheeks couldn't help but flush. Shen Qinqiu internally rolled his eyes. On that topic, he'd just been NTR'd right in front of his face. So why is it he didn't feel unhappy at all? Gong Yixiao led some Huanhua Palace disciples to walk up, and the thing he held in his hands were very familiar. Hello, immortal binding cable. Goodbye, immortal binding cable. Brackets, waves bye-bye. Gong Yixiao's tone was apologetic. Elder Shen, please excuse me. This junior should treat you with respect. Before the truth comes to light, I'll definitely not let Elder suffer. Shen Qinqiu nodded, said 4 words. Thanks for your trouble. What good is it if you only treat me with respect? Looking at the expressions of all of Huanhua Palace's disciples present, he could tell that each one of them wanted to eat him raw. After all, back then, during the Immortal Alliance Conference, the worst casualties were suffered by Huanhua Palace. They had endured a great offense. Once the immortal binding cable was looped around him and securely tied, Shen Qinqiu felt his body sink. Before, whenever the without a cure poison flared up intermittently, he would only feel a blockage of spiritual energy, like a remote control with a bad connection that barely worked when hitting it. As soon as the immortal binding cable was on his body, it thoroughly cut off his spiritual energy, directly reducing him to an ordinary mortal. The old palace master said, "What does everyone think about setting the date of the public trial to 1 month hence?" Liu Qingge said, 5 days. The longer one was imprisoned in the water prison, the more one would suffer. Liu Qingge saying 5 days was to compress the course of the public trial preparation to the shortest time. Of course, the old palace master wouldn't agree. With this speed, I'm afraid much will be overlooked. Mediation was Zhaohua Temple's specialty, and abbot suggested, why not make it 10 days? Yue Qingyuan said, 7 days. No further delay is possible. The haggling of a crowd of sect leaders could be mistaken as a vegetable market. Shen Qinqiu had his own considerations and hurriedly said, no need to say more. Listen to the palace master's arrangements. 1 month. Actually, any further delay would be favorable to the growth of the sun-moon dew mushroom. Out of the corner of his eye, he looked at Shang Qinghua and wriggled his eyebrows. Shang Qinghua understood tacitly, 2 hands hanging in front of his body, secretly giving a, quote, no worries, let me handle it, gesture. Now, the true problem was, could he even survive in the Huanhua Palace that was completely controlled by Luo, Bing, He?